afternoon, everyone. I'm Shane from Student Life. This is Jordan from Christian Union. And in behalf of Christian Union, Student Life, and UC Navigators, we'd like to welcome you to Science and God. We'll be your MCs for tonight, and we'll make sure that everything runs smoothly.
Awesome, thank you, Shane. So, Science and God. This event happened 2 years ago, actually. Maybe some of you were there. And we think that science, or questions concerning science, is a barrier to a lot of people to even consider God. You know, there's the battle between faith against logic. We believe that uni is a place of learning and questioning things, and we want to put this night on to encourage that.
Right, so throughout the event, feel free to put your hands up if you have any questions for the panel, or alternatively, there is a number that you can text your questions to if you want to remain anonymous. So that's the number right there. If you can't see it, hold your phones up, I'll read it out. So it's 021 150 7076. So that's 021 150 7076. Cool. So, like Jordan said, in this event we want to encourage open discussion and debate about this whole controversial tension between science and God. So we've invited 3 university academic staff to participate in this discussion.
Yes, we have. And you're going to learn a little bit about them. So we have David Wareham in the middle here. And we have an impressive title to go with it. We have Associate Professor, College of Engineering, Dean, in brackets, International, and Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor Engineering, aka very important person. And we have here on my right, Stefanie Gutschmidt. She's a Senior Lecturer of Mechanical Engineering, also a very important person. And our last, on the far right, we have Phillipa Gourdie, who is a Senior Tutor in Mathematics and received a UC Teaching Award in 2016, which I can see why, because I was her student in 2014. You can vouch for that. So, we are going to, we're looking at the topic of science and God. I'm now referring to you, the lecturers. People often think that science and faith don't go together. How have you found this in your own lives?
Okay, so I'm going to start by answering this question with something about me and my life. So I heard the gospel, the news of Christianity, message of Christianity as a child, and it certainly seemed to me as a young child that it was true. It fitted with what I saw in my own life, the sense of right and wrong I had, and the guilt I felt at doing wrong. And although I couldn't have articulated this when I was young, I saw the inexplicable contrast of evil and suffering with the goodness and beauty in the world. But there were a lot of competing voices, and these drowned out thoughts about God, just as Jesus describes when he says that the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word. And so I went on living my life for myself, but I'm thankful that God didn't forget me quite so easily. And through different events in my life, God has shown me his love and the truthfulness of his words in the Bible. And that also relates to, more recently, how I think of science and God. So my father had rheumatic fever as a child, which left him with a damaged heart valve. In his mid-30s, his heart started failing. He was in hospital for several months, and he had open heart surgery when it was still a very new procedure. He was given very little chance of surviving the surgery, but without surgery he would have died. He survived the surgery, but his brush with death and the deaths of his fellow patients, many of whom were younger and less critically ill than Dad, caused Dad to think about the nature of reality. Over a number of years and a lot of reading, he became convinced of the truth of Christianity. This had a big impact on me, watching all this as a teenager. And through seeing Dad's experience, and also through the witness of a Christian friend at school, I also committed my life to following Jesus Christ. Now, mathematics, I will admit, was my favourite subject at school, and not biology. I actually will also confess to occasionally not going to my biology classes. But I was interested in medicine, partly because of Dad. And so when I finished school, I studied medical laboratory technology. My favourite subject was cell biology. This was utterly fascinating and very different from biology classes at school. The complexity of the cell, even back then, probably 30 years ago, was amazing. And we've only found so much more in the intervening 30 years about how even more complex the cell is. So I specialised in microbiology and planned to go to medical school once I finished to train as a pathologist. But getting married and having children meant that I put aside my plans to go to medical school, but I still loved learning, and I studied mathematics in my spare time. My friends all thought this was a rather strange hobby, but the beauty, logic and power of mathematics reinforced my belief in God, as it has for many scientists such as Galileo, Kepler, Boyle, James Clerk Maxwell, who's my particular hero, and the great mathematicians Riemann and Euler. These scientists considered their work to be studying the works of God. The Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge University has the words of Psalm 111, verse 2, written in Latin on its door. Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. Moving to Christchurch and the opportunity to work at university, teaching mathematics, challenged me to think about my faith in God carefully, especially when my husband of almost 30 years died in a motorcycle crash. Suddenly I was faced with the overwhelming reality of death, and this raised doubts about God. Maybe my caring, kind, thoughtful and loving atheist friends were right, and death was just the end, the cessation of existence. For the first time in my life, I had serious doubts about my faith, and this made me re-examine the arguments and the evidence for God and the evidence of science. It's strongly put by many today that science has disproved God, but is this true? The more we learn about the world around us, especially the unseen world of cells and molecules, the greater the complexity and sophistication we see. The field of biomimetics or biomimicry copies nature to build new technologies. The Wikipedia entry on biomimetics states, nature has solved engineering problems such as self-healing abilities, environmental exposure tolerance and resistance, hydrophobicity, self-assembly and harnessing solar energy. But nature itself is just the material world that we observe. Solving problems and designing solutions is the work of an intelligent mind. James Tour, one of the world's leading nano-engineers, has stated, I build molecules for a living. I can't begin to tell you how difficult that job is. I stand in awe of God because of what he has done through his creation. There is abundant evidence of design in nature, so much so that Francis Crick wrote that biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. There is much more I could say, but this is not intended to be a technical talk. But it's important to see that science is influenced by the worldview of the scientist. For a scientist committed to naturalism with no place for religion, any theory of origins is required to be entirely materialistic. But then to use this theory to claim that it disproves the existence of God is a circular argument. So as a result of all my questioning, I came to the conclusion that the evidence of science, especially the new developments in molecular biology, argues very strongly for a creator. So what evidence is there for the truth of the Christian faith? Very briefly, I believe it's grounded in historical events, in particular the life, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Bible's unique in its makeup and its claims, written over 1,500 years by about 40 different authors, and yet with a consistent and unified message. The life and death of Jesus fulfilled Old Testament predictions, made many centuries beforehand. And the message of the Bible is consistent with what we see in the world around us. It explains the beauty and goodness we see, as well as the suffering, injustice, and evil. An atheist friend of mine once passionately said to me, "Death is just wrong." What gives us the sense that death is wrong? Why is a sense of transcendence and longing such a common human experience? Perhaps it is because of the words in Ecclesiastes in the Bible. God has set eternity in the hearts of men. I think the Christian faith is unique among religions because it's not just a set of ideas or a rule book. It's primarily about a person, Jesus Christ. And it offers forgiveness and peace and love, not by our own efforts or good works, but the free gift of God.
So I was brought up in a mixed family, in the sense that my mother became a Christian shortly after she was married. Anyways, I grew up, and one of the important things of having a father who is essentially an atheist is that when you go to church, or Sunday school at the time, and you hear things taught, you're forced to question it, because immediately you come home and your father will put cold water on it, so it doesn't encourage sort of easy believism. And so at a very young age, I was forced to think through my faith. I was interested in the sciences. I was born in 1960, so that means that I grew up during the height of the space race, knew all the astronauts or whatever, all the flights, etc. Every time a rocket went up successfully, it was hailed as a great scientific achievement. Every time it blew up in its launch pad, it was an engineering failure. So I sided with the underdog and became an engineer.
Right, so how science and faith played a role in my life wasn't so much the question about science and faith as the original meaning and the meaning behind the words, but I always thought they would be mutually exclusive. So I saw the science people, which were cool and I wanted to belong to, and then on the other side there were faith people that were rather boring, and in my view. And then I got to know people, they were scientists and had faith, and that brought the stone rolling. And then over years, so that's the part in my life that made a difference, or started me thinking about the two concepts. And I just want to share a little bit two different viewpoints on the science and faith. I'm thinking that science and faith have one common thing, and that's about knowledge. And I think the science is kind of a process of discovering things, how you come to the knowledge. And in faith, you come to that knowledge by revelation. Now you have to practice your senses somehow to get to that revelation, or how that process is a different question. But what I want to say as an example is, you know that I'm from Germany, so it's a nice story in terms of going there in winter and summer. So if I'm starting here now, it's winter time, there's summer. I have the knowledge, and I go by faith that there is summer, and I pack short sleeves and shorts. So that's the knowledge. Or I can swim all the way over there and make my way distance by distance and figure it out that there actually is summer over there. So maybe that's an analogy that could help you to identify the two things, that I'm thinking science is discovering the knowledge, and faith is a knowledge that you have, and it's up to you whether you believe it or disbelieve it.
Yeah, draw the short story. Is God a scientist? Well, if we understand scientist in the classical sense of one who conducts, measurements in the natural world, it's not obviously, he's not obviously quite that sort of scientist, okay? But if we understand as someone who's interested in knowledge and knows things and is educated about it, then obviously he's the epitome of knowledge. and knows everything. So in that sense, he's certainly a scientist. One of the characteristics of scientists would obviously be that they would be interested in the truth. All right, that's why they conduct experiments. What is the truth of that particular thing that they're experimenting with? And I certainly believe that the God of the Bible, as revealed, is a God of truth. And so in that sense, obviously there's some synergies there. It's a good question. I've never thought of it in that exact way. Anything to add there?
I would add to that you'd have to distinguish by the meanings of the words again. If a scientist and science is figuring things out that are already there, then God is not a scientist because he's the creator of things. He is there before things are there to figure out. So doesn't go together for me.
I would agree with Stefanie, and I would say that for me, science is a human endeavour. It's what we do as we explore and learn about and understand the world around us, and also seek to care for the world around us, to care for the environment. So in that sense, God is not a scientist, but he certainly knows thoroughly how the world works because he made it, and I believe he upholds it all the time as well.
The advantage of going first is that you can say whatever you want, and the other two can contradict it because they have time to think about it. So, lesson learned. I'll pass the mic next time to them. Okay, my view on this whole thing is, first of all, I think every Christian, by definition, would have to be a creationist in the sense of they believe in a creator. All right? I mean, that's clearly taught in the Christian faith that God is the creator of everything. So, in that sense, without consulting with my colleagues here, I'm sure that we would all agree that we are creationists in that sense. Okay? Now, in terms of what is probably behind that question, which is a sort of six-day literal creationist. This is obviously a complex thing. And I guess in my view, and I've looked at the literature over the many years that I've been interested in the subject, and what I have noticed time and time again is that there is a whole spectrum of beliefs on this issue amongst Christians. All right? There is certainly theistic evolutionists who believe in punctuated equilibrium. There's gradualist theistic evolutionists. There's progressive creationists. There are day-age theories, gap theories, literal six-day creationists. And when you examine their lives, you find committed and godly men and women on all sides of that spectrum. And so what I view is that when I actually look at what stops a person from getting into heaven, as found in 1 Corinthians 6, I think it is, all right, there's a list of things that are there, and belief or non-belief in the creationist of a six-day literal is not listed. And that, to me, means that it is what I would call a second-order issue, not a first-order issue that prevents people from getting into heaven. And as such, then, what we need to have is a lot of tolerance for people along that spectrum in their beliefs, because there's no question that you have committed Christians on all sides of the fence. For example, when Darwin proposed his theory in America, the great botanist Asa Gray wrote a book called Darwinia, and he is a very, very committed Christian. And you go away all the spectrum. And one thing I have realized is that on that spectrum of beliefs, regardless of which position that you take, there are significant both theological and scientific tensions. All right? Doesn't matter where you are on the screen of things, there are significant scientific and theological tensions that are very difficult to resolve. So my view is that we need an increased tolerance and respect in that discussion, allowing for the fact that there are solid Christians on all along that fence. And so certainly I think that if you were to adopt that 6th day, I believe that certainly you can be a Christian for sure, because I do know many people who are on that fence, on that side. And I think as long as you're honest to acknowledge the scientific issues and the theological issues in there, I think you conduct both theology and science in that vein.
If you are looking at the work of people who believe in a 6-day creation and a young earth, Kurt Wise and Todd Wood are 2 scientists who are working in this field but are serious scientists and who acknowledge the tensions. So they're 2 people that are worth reading, Kurt Wise and Todd Wood.
I might add, Kurt Wise is a paleontologist who did his PhD under Stephen Jay Gould from Harvard.
Well, I think the question was also on whether a creationist would be able to publish and be recognized as... What was it? Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, if someone believed in creationism, could they be a credible scientist?
As with all subjects in science and philosophy, you have your cohorts, and I can understand that question very well, because in particularly these areas, it must be very critical to when you publish that you get the right reviewers, that you get your papers through, and I think the question might go in that direction, whether you would get a credibility in that regard. I can't answer that question because I'm not pursuing research in that field, but I can definitely see that that is a valid question and a difficult task to undertake.
First of all, I want to say that basically God has revealed himself in 2 ways. He's revealed himself in the Bible. Sometimes we call that special revelation. And he's also revealed himself in the world around us, and sometimes that's called natural revelation. And we need to be open to truth in both of these areas. But when we are talking about origins, for example, or historical science, that's very different to empirical science. Empirical science is when we can do experiments, test and see if they're repeatable. Historical science is very different, and theories in historical science or narratives tend to be underpinned by a person's worldview. So we do have to be careful in answering that question, but also we need to be careful too when we interpret the Bible, because it's a book of by different authors with different genres, and I don't think we can be, and it's not written as a scientific textbook, although it is true in what it states in the cultural and historical context and the literary genre. So I think that the 2 are compatible, and we see truth in both. David might be able to add some more.
Well, just to add a little bit, in the sense that I would say that at least we 3 up here are what we would call evidentialists, in the sense that we base our belief upon the Creator God on the basis of the evidence that we see before us. Now, whether that evidence comes from the scientific world, the natural revelation, or it comes from special revelation, it's probably, I know it is, it's a mixture of both, okay? But I would say we are evidentialists. Now, what Phillipa was picking up was that she's absolutely right. When you talk about origins or history, you're talking about the historical sciences. Now, what that means is that when we look at the evidence before us, that we use all the techniques of science available to us to examine the data that we have, and then we forensically work backwards to deduce or abduct towards the existence of an intelligent mind behind that. Right? So it is more akin to the forensic operations, like forensic engineering. You see the results of a disaster and you work backwards and find out what has happened. Forensic medicine, you see the diagnosis that is presented to itself, you work back and figure out the cause. Archaeology, anything in the historical sciences, okay, you work backwards. And it is that type of application of science which lends credence to the theology that we profess. Yes, absolutely. Science definitely has its limits, and you should always take on those who suggest that it has no limits and can explain the absolute meanings. And what you have to do is to look for words like solely or only or anything that is known in the area of philosophy as ontological reductionism, which basically says this is the explanation solely in terms of a materialistic explanation, and that's all there is. Questions of ultimate meaning, like what I was suggesting when I was a kid, why am I here? What am I doing in life? What's it all about? Cannot be answered by science, and certainly you will find atheistic scientists like certainly Stephen Jay Gould, who's a famous paleontologist I referred to earlier, would absolutely, if he was still alive, would back that. It has its limits, and it cannot make any comment on meaning if you reduce it.
I cannot say I've ever completely not believed. I think from a young child I was somehow aware or didn't question the existence of God. But for a long time I pushed God completely aside and lived as if he didn't exist. The closest I've come to not believing is the crisis of faith that I had after my husband died, because I work with some wonderful people in the maths department here who are atheists, convinced atheists, and I saw that they had perhaps their behaviour wasn't consistent with their worldview, but they had a strongly held and strongly argued for worldview, and they are people who were very kind and caring and thoughtful, and this really challenged me. So that would be the closest I've come, but that's what caused me to really rethink things and to take a good, long, hard look at the evidence. You know, we have people in our department who are working in the area of evolutionary biology, and so yeah, I had a good, hard look at that.
I will only say that there was a time when I did not believe, obviously, prior to when I decided to become a Christian. Once I became a Christian, I did go through a number of years where there was no advancement in my faith. But like any person, that if you come to faith when you are a teen, as you grow older, you recalibrate that belief on the basis of information that's coming in, through your educational system, through your parents, your culture, whatever. And as soon as you move away from child-based beliefs and get into evidentiary thinking, that's when all that recalibration goes on. And all I have been able to do is it reaffirmed my initial decision. But I have certainly, throughout my life, engaged in an enormous number of conversations with those who do not share my worldview to try and understand where they're coming from and to sharpen my own reasons for believing. And what I can say is that I stand here and God has faithfully placed me in the position that I'm much more confident as I go on that this is a credible way of looking at the universe and a credible way of explaining the data that I see. Well, I'm going to start. That gives them time to think. Right? They can come up with a much better answer than mine.
You can call a friend if you want, or we'll go 50-50.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. I'm just going to take a minute to text that number. No, I think one must make a distinction. There are certain branches of science, particularly the measurable sciences, which your faith in God doesn't play any, it's totally neutral. I mean, how far is it from A to B? You just take a measurement and that's it, right, and you report it. So your faith is independent of that, okay? And that can progress quite a bit up sort of the food chain. I mean, there's people who've won Nobel Prizes who are atheists, and the next year a Christian has won it. So something like 64% of the Nobel Prizes in chemistry have been won by Christians, and physics is not far behind that. So your faith is independent of that sort of thing. It's the moment that you start taking the data and interpreting it according to a worldview, all right? And that means that you make statements beyond that. You sew things together, you join them up. That's when it becomes critical. And that's when I'm engaging in a conversation with someone, that's what I'm listening for, is not so much the science, but how they've sewn it together and interpreted it, right? If someone says to me, there is no evidence for God, I say, holy smokes, of course I believe that there's evidence for God. I'm not an idiot. If there wasn't, I wouldn't believe it. What's the point, right? So the evidence that I'm looking at is exactly the same evidence that this person is looking at, but I am inferring backwards by abduction to a different conclusion, right? And when I do that, then I'm putting on the interpretation of the data. I think it was Einstein who said, facts don't separate people, it's the interpretation of the facts that actually separates people.
My first word that came to mind was the joy. And although I'm not speaking of every scientist, because I know that top scientists and quite numerous scientists, they have a joy when they figure things out, but the average business of doing science every day, and also like mundane and very laborious work, the day after day after day after day, where you don't see anything. The faith makes a difference because you're enjoying it more, because you're figuring things out, because of the bigger meaning in it, and I would say the meaningfulness everyday work, because the action is the joy in itself and not the goal necessarily where you want to be, because you don't know what you're going to figure out in the end, or whether you figure something out in the end at all. But does it prevent you from doing it anyway? What makes you wake up in the morning and go to work? Those fundamental questions are making a difference in science, where I can see they wouldn't be there otherwise. So that's a question that everyone needs to answer for themselves.
This question is directed to Dave. If God does not show favoritism, how come he made you so much more handsome than everyone else? No, I'm kidding. No, here's the question. It is a fun one. Jesus...
there are some things in science that are totally incomprehensible.
Or would he be at Polytech doing carpentry?
There's no question. There's no question. If he studied here, it would be civil engineering.
Actually, I wanted to go first.
Was that a serious question?
Written on the paper.
If Jesus studied here, what would be his major? Well, I wouldn't want to lecture to him, that's for sure. Human relations. I think I need him worse. Yeah.
I don't find that contradictory at all. Maybe also some facts for the Christians. When you don't read up on that topic, Big Bang is just a word and a popular thought that is made up by the media. But the Big Bang is not like something that happened in big times and were kind of chaotic, but they're talking about a very orderly thing that happened in a sudden. And so God is big. He's much bigger. If you read the Bible in Isaiah, he spans the universe between two fingers. So I think God is pretty big. So the Big Bang fits with the creation, and the sun is also written down. Although I'm not trying even to match the two things. So what was the question initially? The Big Bang.
Yeah, can you believe in
Yeah,
the Big Bang and...
Okay, yeah. So yes, it's possible to believe in both, and that it is again, science is therefore discovering these things. It's not like to contradict the things. If you have a pure agenda, if you're pure heart to figuring things out, what there is, we have clear evidence for these things, and by the equipment that we use today and it's available today, these are the things that we observe. So we go by that.
Certainly in Genesis we read of a God who created time and space and matter, space-time. And so in fact the Big Bang theory was actually seen as supporting Christianity when it first came along, because before then the main belief was in a universe that had always existed. So it's certainly not inconsistent.
Yeah, I'll leave that there. One could go quite a long time on that, but I'm interested in hearing the other questions.
Okay, we have another one directed to Phillipa, and it's a serious one. Regarding Philippa's opening, would naturalistic explanations for the complexity she has witnessed undermine her faith in any way?
I think when we're doing science, we are discovering or learning about how God has done things. So it's sometimes people pit the two explanations against each other. It's either science or God, but that's a false dichotomy. Science can look at and describe processes and mechanisms and laws, but these things need causation or agency. They're not things that can generate themselves. I don't know if I'm putting this very well, but I think the more you go back and try and find naturalistic explanations for everything, the more you're going in circles. The new sort of people who have realized that the neo-Darwinian view of evolution is inadequate to describe what we see have put forward the new extended evolutionary synthesis. And this maintains that important drivers of evolution, ones that cannot be reduced to genes, must be woven into the very fabric of evolutionary theory. And I quote. And it's getting almost circular here. You're basically saying that evolution drives itself, and I just don't buy that. It doesn't. In this alternative vision of evolution, the processes by which organisms grow and develop are recognized as themselves causes of evolution. Well, how can evolution cause itself? So I think this, the more we find out about how processes work, the more we are seeing the glory of God in the processes He's created. And you can't say that things cause themselves.
I'd like to pick up on that question. Just could you repeat it one more time? Because I want to pick up a nuance on it, even though it was directed to Phillipa.
Okay, it's been folded under a big pile of paper.
Okay, I'm just going to answer it pretending I remember it then. I think the question that was asked was, how is her study of complexity? And I think what was missed there is that, because I have an interest in biochemistry, because of the branch of engineering that I'm in, what was missed there was that it's not complexity that is the issue, it's specified complexity. All right, it's complexity which has a semiotic dimension. All right, now what that means is that in common vernacular is that it carries information. And that's what has to be explained, the information, not so much the complexity. Because we look at information as carried in in languages, and all our scientists tell us that the origin of a language is a mind. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a human language or a computer language. And then we come to the 3.5 billion long DNA digital base, which is the DNA code. Right? The automatic inference is that there has to be a mind behind it. All right, and it is that issue in terms of the direction of deduction that's going. Okay, we're working from specified complexity, not the complexity of a snowflake. All right, it's one that carries information that allows us to work backwards. Right, my answer, well, these guys think can come up with a better answer. My answer is absolutely. I've had, I would call them discussions with a number of my colleagues, and the response has been ranging from, "Ooh, this is very interesting, and let's continue the discussion," all the way to colleagues that think I'm absolutely deluded, which is, well, you have to test that. Where's the evidence, as I say? Okay. Those who have lectured by me don't say anything at this point in time, right? Yeah, I do have discussions. Can you repeat the question one more time? There was something I wanted to pick up again.
Do you love debating with your atheist colleagues? And if so, what is the common objection?
Oh yes, the common objection. All right, well, it centers around belief often in miracles and their understanding of miracles, essentially. You know, if you believe in science, how could you possibly believe in miracles? And of course, I ultimately say, oh, well, you just think I believe that Jesus walked on water. It's much, much worse than that. I believe he actually rose from the dead. So if you didn't think I was deluded before, you now think I'm really deluded, right? So it's the issue of understanding of miracles, and they don't seem to understand that miracles are not exceptions to the laws of nature, is what Phillipa just said. Okay, laws of nature describe regularities in nature. They're mathematical descriptions of regularities. Right? Newton's law of motion describes the movement of a billiard ball on a pool table. It has nothing to say about how that billiard ball started moving in the first place. So if your worldview believes that it can be injection of power and energy into the system from outside, then miracles are absolutely possible. But it doesn't mean that miracles are violations of nature. I believe in the virgin birth, okay, an injection of power. But once that happened, all right, the laws of nature took over. 9 months later, a baby was born, right? The people that were around at that time knew exactly where babies came from. I mean, Joseph immediately doubted that, and it took a special revelation to him to convince him that there was an injection of energy from outside, okay? So once I explain that my understanding of miracles and theirs is quite different, and that miracles are not a violation of nature, we start to make a little bit of progress in our discussion. Well, I think the answer to that question has to revolve around the definition, okay, of evolution. Certainly I believe in variation within kind, microevolution as it's called. If you're using it in the context of macroevolution, I believe that there is some evidence for that. The question is can it carry the weight of all the evidence? All right, that's the debate that has to happen. Can it explain everything? Because if it can explain everything, then I can clearly see that there is no need for a God. But if it cannot explain everything, and certainly if I was to take the theistic evolutionist point of view, they would believe that its complexity and the way that the evolutionary process navigates through that in itself is evidence pointing backwards to God, okay? Because it actually ends up in a result, okay? So it's a question of can it bear the weight of all the evidence, and I think not. There has to be an infusion of energy, and particularly the gap at the beginning, which is the origin, as Phillipa has alluded to, the origin of life. They tend to gloss over that, call it molecular evolution, and really it is a gap that can only, in my view, be explained by creative energy.
even more so than that, and I completely agree with David. I do not think evolutionary theory can explain even what we see biologically. So MIT professor Evelyn Keller, no Christian, has written a fascinating book called The Century of the Gene, and its basic premise is that the concept we've had of the gene is wrong. DNA is now being shown not to be the centralized program whose code predetermines everything about an organism, its development, its functioning. Rather, DNA is now being shown to be merely one dynamic element in the networks that make up a living organism. And not only that, but the circular feedback mechanisms that regulate these networks. One effect of that is the restructuring of the genome itself. So it's no longer just this linear thing where DNA codes for everything that goes on. It's now seen that DNA is just a part of an organism. And Evelyn Keller writes in her book, The Century of the Gene, the genetic program of an organism consists of and lives in the interactive complex made up of genomic structures and the vast network of cellular machinery in which those structures are embedded. It may even be that this program is irreducible in the sense that nothing less complex than the organism itself is able to do the job. So evolution has no explanation for the origin of the cell and cellular replication, the machinery that produces proteins. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure I would necessarily agree with that, because that is sort of promulgating a belief that the God is basically a God of the gaps, that we don't understand it, and we call it a miracle, and then we peel it back as we understand it. That's not the kind of God that Christians believe in. They don't believe in a God of the gaps. They believe in a God of the whole show. Okay, so there are actually two types of gaps. There are gaps which are what we would call bad gaps, which science reveals and quickly closes. Okay, they used to believe that there was thunder and lightning and there was a God up there that caused that all, but an elementary course in atmospheric physics will quickly dispel that notion. But there are also good gaps that science opens up and we cannot understand. We've referred to one, the origin of life. All right, I don't think that will ever be closed by science. Okay, so if you want to call it a miracle, well, I do think it is a miracle. It's an injection of energy from above, but I don't think it'll be closed by science eventually.
I think that question is also already limiting to the circumference of what science is, because that excludes already all the coincidence, which we don't need in a scientific explanation in the scientific sense that we need to find a physical law for something happen when two people, for instance, meet at a particular time when they have to meet, which in itself could be a miracle. So it kind of, you have to go by the definition of a miracle. What is a miracle? Is it a divine intervention, or is it something that we can't explain with science? So there's a difference that you have to take it already.
The two things I would answer, and one is that there is historical evidence for the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the uniqueness of the Bible, the type of book it is. It's not just a rule book, not just a book of philosophy, it's a book of history, but it's also consistent in its teaching. So I really encourage you to examine the evidence for yourself. Read the Bible. The New Testament's not a long book. It's a collection of books, but it's not long. Read the New Testament. Read the Bible. Read some other good books that have that deal with the evidence that there is. So The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel is one possibility. And I'm sure David's got more to add.
Well, actually, surprisingly, I think they've said pretty well everything. I just repeat, all religions have some kind of truth. They have to, all right? Even the worst religion of all, Satanism, has some truth. It preaches that Satan is real and alive and is an enemy of God. Okay, so all religions have some kind of truth. You make that decision like any other decision you make, based on the evidence before you, as Phillipa said. You investigate the evidence. Take the three monotheistic religions. One says Jesus died, one said he died and rose again, and one said he never died. Can't all right? Investigate the evidence and come to the conclusion yourself. Okay, yeah. So I was asked if I could summarize a couple of things without knowing where the discussion was going to go. But I think what you can pick up from our comments here, that if we look at the natural world, we see it as evidence that points towards a creator, right? And I mentioned the digital database that is the DNA code. It practically screams out to me that there is a mind behind the universe. So that leads me to theism. But as we said before, theism as is, or science as is, it cannot answer questions of ultimate meaning. It cannot answer questions of why am I here? What is my purpose in life? Okay? But I can deduce that there is a mind behind the universe, an intelligence. Okay? Now, when I think about the purpose of life, okay, that's a why question. And just like some people might doubt it, but there's a mind behind me, okay? And in order for you to get to know me, I have to reveal myself to you, because that answers the question of purpose, okay? For example, there's a lovely illustration. If I bake a cake, you can ask me why I baked the cake, okay? Science will tell you how the chemical ingredients are there, sodium bicarbonate made it rise, and so on and so forth. But science cannot answer the question of why I made the cake. And it doesn't mean that you disengage reason. If I tell you that I made the cake because my birthday is this weekend, you can investigate that. You'll find it's false. My birthday was last weekend. But if I tell you my wedding anniversary is this weekend, you can investigate that. You'll find it is. All right? That's why I baked the cake. Okay? So the mind has to reveal it. So we can ask ourselves the question, is there any evidence anywhere in the universe where God has revealed himself, okay? And when I examine the Christian faith, I believe that he has spoke into the world in the form of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, in his death and resurrection, which again, you can examine the evidence for that, provides the ultimate validation of the claims that Jesus made. When Jesus was on the earth, he made a claim not only to be from God, he claimed to be God. It was an astounding claim. And in order to demonstrate that he was God, he performed a series of divine exorcisms and miracles. And these were specifically geared towards authenticating that claim. All right, he demonstrated when he healed the sick, it was demonstrating his authority over sickness. When he walked on water, it was demonstrating his authority over nature. When he threw out spirits, it was his authority over the demon world. And ultimately, as I say, the supreme validation of that claim was when he was conquering death and raised himself from the grave. Now, while he was here on earth, he answered the question of why. He said to his disciples, I'm not going to call you servants anymore, I want to call you friends, all right? The purpose of our existence is to be in fellowship with God as friends. Now, as we all know, if we look at ourselves honestly, we are in a state of disfellowship because of something called sin. All right? And Jesus claimed that through his death and resurrection, that would solve the problem. It would provide a vehicle for us to be in fellowship with God. And so, can I challenge you? I know tonight that if you're here and you do not believe in God, what is being given out for free to those who are not Christians, but would like to seriously open their minds and investigate the truth of those claims, we have a book. Which gospel is it? Luke or gospel? It is the book of Luke, okay, which is a wonderful account which provides a framework for evaluating those claims of Jesus Christ. And if you read it, can I ask you to do two things? The first is, if you've never read it before, or if you read it as a child before, read it as an adult, okay, as sort of an investigative journalist. Look at that framework. If Jesus claimed to be God, he said, "In me the kingdom of God has come. I have authority to forgive sins." Is there enough evidence there for you to believe that? The second thing, more profoundly perhaps, is to ask yourself the question, what if it was really true? Right? What if someone did arise from the dead? Wouldn't that have a profound impact on the way that I live my life? All right.
Awesome, thanks for that, Dave. And I'd just like to thank you, and Stefanie and Phillipa as well, for giving up your precious time and subjecting yourself to scrutiny and all the tough questions. I'm sure it wasn't easy. So can we just give them a quick round of applause?